Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Yes. Today I'm going to be speaking with you about how trademarks are perceived when they're used as indications of product sponsorship rather than product origin. So very much following up on the second talk we heard today. And to give you the 1-minute review of what I'm talking about, basics of trademark law, which you probably all already know. The basic trademark question is who makes or puts out this product? You see a box of Godiva chocolate, and you have the name, you have the image, you have the trade dress. Everything about this tells you that Godiva makes this. Your decision about whether to purchase this product, your willingness to pay for it, your attributions of quality control, all go back to Godiva. If you don't like the chocolate in the box, you blame Godiva. That's the canonical trademark case, that search costs, that makes everyone happy. Where life gets odd is when we see a product like this. If you ask the very same question, who makes or puts out this product, everything that told you that Godiva was the answer before tells you that the New York City Police Department is the answer now. And I could put on my criminal procedure hat and tell you what the New York City Police Department actually does, but the one thing we all know is they don't make hats. There isn't someone in the basement of the police station with the uniform on sewing. That's not how this happens. Say you stare at the Amazon ad and you're trying to figure out, do I have a pointer? No. Well, you see the words by Rothko up there. And you think, well, maybe Rothko makes the hat. But then you see the words official licensed. Yes, the ad actually says official licensed, not officially licensed. Amazon is weird. And you say, well, what's really going on here is Rothko makes the hat, but the police department gave permission for the hat to be made. So question number 2 in the trademark survey is generally, do you assume that whoever made this product had the permission of someone else? So here, Rothko makes it, New York City Police Department licensed it, sponsored it, authorized it, choose your favorite word. And the trademark issue with this is when you turn to the rationales for trademark law existing, and you ask, who's in charge of the quality of this product? Who do you blame if this product is terrible? How much are you going to pay for that product? It becomes very unclear which company you should be thinking about. Because if you think the police department is a fine, upstanding organization that does high quality work, does that mean you think this hat is going to be good? Or is that a nonsensical statement? And any number of very prominent trademark scholars have looked at cases like NYPD hats, have looked at cases like Harvard University sweatshirts, looked at sports jerseys, and said, the answers to any materiality question coming out of this, all the usual rationales in trademark law, should be no. So the sponsor is not in charge of the quality of the product. You do not blame the sponsor if the product is bad. You're not more interested in purchasing it because you think it's sponsored. You're not willing to pay more if it's sponsored. You just want your Batman on the cereal box. You have no particular interest in why Batman is there. You just want the picture. You just want your Bulls jersey. You don't care if it's officially licensed. And talking to people before I ran this experiment and talking to people as I've been presenting it, I've met any number of people who think that if you care whether your product is sponsored, you are absolutely crazy. That you should not be willing to pay $1 more for the officially licensed version. And I've met any number of people who think that's absurd. That this is my team, my school. Why would I not care if they were involved in this? Why would I want this counterfeit thing? Even if this counterfeit thing is objectively as good, it's still not right, it's wrong. And what I was doing in this study was looking at 2 versions of the sponsorship confusion formula. Version A is the one that is currently the law. You say, here is a product, who makes it? And I go down the list of responses and tally up the number of people who say, the New York City Police Department made this hat. They're wrong, but I count them. Then I say, do they have the sponsorship of someone else? If so, who? I count up the number of people who say, the NYPD sponsors this hat, even though they didn't make it. I add those 2 together on a one-to-one basis, and I compare to threshold. Version 2, same basic formula until you get to sponsorship and say, I only count your attribution of sponsorship if you care. If you think the sponsor is in charge of quality, that's fine, you count. If you think the sponsor had nothing to do with quality and this is some kind of naked license, you don't count. If you're not willing to pay more because it's sponsored, you don't count. And this is a way of dealing with the problem of trademark over breadth, the problem of dealing with incidental uses of trademarks, the problem of dealing with aesthetic uses of trademarks. And any number of people have said we should be in the world of Formula 2, not Formula 1. And my question in this project was not who's right, but rather, say we grant the assumption that Formula 2 is what we should be doing, do we actually get different results? And that goes to the question that was just raised at the end, saying, actually at the middle of the last Q&A, doing Formula 2 is very resource intensive. We should only do this if it's actually going to matter. So in my study, I had a variety of products. I believe there were 17 of them. I took them off Amazon, modified the ads very, very slightly. The end result looked like this, basically. And the first question was simply, who makes or puts out the product? Free response. I had NYPD hat, St. Louis Arch t-shirt, and of course, because how could I resist, the Louis Vuitton dog toy. So first question, who makes or puts it out? Second question is the classic sponsorship attribution. I could talk about why these particular words, because there is some dispute about that, but I think it probably doesn't matter too much. And then free response, who is that? And first of many, many tables, green is below 20%. And all I'm trying to show with this table is that of these many, many products, if you're just looking at maker confusion, you're often below 20%. So maker confusion by itself isn't slam dunk for most of these products. Major League Baseball and the NFL are fine, even if you just look at maker confusion. Two car products are fine if you just look at maker confusion. But looking at everything else, so these are Harvard t-shirts, NYPD hats, fire department hats, the Olympic shirt, the Louis Vuitton dog toy. There's a famous case involving a movie called Drop Dead Gorgeous. It had originally been called Dairy Queen, but then of course the restaurant Dairy Queens objected. So I had a movie entitled Dairy Queen and saw what people said about that. For most of these, you need sponsorship confusion, column 2 to be added in to get to trademark confusion. And that tells me that it's really important to know how much of this would count under a materiality analysis. So the materiality questions. One was simply, who's in charge of the quality of the product? Is it the maker? Is it the sponsor? Both, neither. Of course, rotating the top two options. And alongside with that is the relation back question. You open the box of chocolate, you hate it, who do you blame? Do you think less of the company that you think sponsored it? So this, imagine you're in the Harvard University gift shop, you're buying the shirt, you walk out, and it immediately falls apart. Is this Harvard's fault? Or when you look at the tag and realize it was made by Banana Republic or whoever, do you blame Banana Republic? Now, again with the large table, again with colors trying to make it comprehensible, yellow is above 50%, red is above 60%, green is below a third. And all you need to take away from this table is that the groupings on these two questions are relatively tight. We get more variance on other questions. This one averages out to 51%. This one averages out to 28%. And these are only among people who attributed sponsorship to the right group. So you had to say that you thought Harvard sponsored it to be in this analysis at all. And very interestingly, about half attribute responsibility for quality, but less than a third blame the sponsor if it's bad. And there is a literature in marketing talking about how when a strong mark, said Coke, decides to create a new product that's a bit adventurous, say New Coke, you can hate New Coke while still drinking Coke. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. Yes, you conclude that Harvard maybe can't make good shirts, but you're not going to hate Harvard for their involvement in this inferior product. So, two other materiality questions kind of getting more willingness to pay. One is, you have been assuming that Porsche sponsored this mug throughout this entire study. I asked you, that's what you told me spontaneously. Imagine I tell you that you're wrong and Porsche had no involvement whatsoever with this mug. are you less interested in purchasing it now that I have corrected your impression? Or are you completely indifferent? And then just the parallel to it, are you willing to pay more because you believe this is sponsored by Porsche? Or are you willing to pay the same amount either way? And if you're on Amazon, you're looking at sports jerseys and seeing the $100 whatever, you can really think, I'm not willing to pay more that because it's sponsored. It's that if I want this thing at all, I have to pay this amount. And that was my personal intuition. A lot of people, however, do disagree with me. So here, the averages are 44% and 38%. The colors mean the same thing they did on the last slide. And what jumps out at me here is the variability. So the Dairy Queen's movie case, which is kind of the greatest overreacher trademark law I've ever seen, that's actually at 16 to 20%, which I found shockingly interesting. But the sports teams and the automotive products are very, very high. Lots of people would pay much less if those were not sponsored. And I did ask as a follow-up, oh, you said you'd pay less. How much less? And you could look at this and say, I bet this is normal distribution. Lots of people would pay the same amount. Other people would pay 10% less. That's not what I was getting. If you said you'd pay less, you were getting numbers like 70% less, 90% less. I would never purchase this product less. So it is a minority of people, 44% saying they would be less interested if sponsored, and 38% saying they pay less if sponsored. But those people really, really mean it. And there is a literature in psychology discussing how people feel about counterfeit products. So the study was, you walk into the experiment, you're handed a pair of sunglasses and told, oh, these are genuine whatever sunglasses. Or you're told, they're fake whatever sunglasses. And people behaved less ethically if they thought they were wearing counterfeit sunglasses. It's one of those findings you just stare at, except, of course, it was a psychology study, so they were the same glasses regardless. But the feeling of a counterfeit really got to people. And that's what I was seeing here. So updating table 1, discounting by those who are not willing to pay more. Green is still below 20%. Suddenly a lot of these products, like a Statue of Liberty, a Field Museum charm, St. Louis Art shirt, etc., those are becoming things that are very disputable. Having said that, a lot of these categories have not been touched. So we barely moved the automotive category, we barely moved the baseball category. The Super Bowl category is still perfectly safe. Many of the people calling for materiality requirements, some of which might be in this room, I'm not that good with faces yet, I think would have expected a much larger change than I'm seeing here, but I am seeing a change. And the parity products I had were substantially affected, which may be indicative in and of itself. One final analysis, I asked at the very end of the study, apart from whatever you thought, and this is to everyone, here's a Yankees jersey. Do you think the Yankees should have needed to give permission for this product? On it as a normative matter, what do you think? And on down the line. And red is again above 60% and yellow is above 50%. So just looking down this chart, for so many of these products, even people who did not assume sponsorship think there should have had to have been sponsorship. I don't take these data at face value. People are ignoring externalities. They're ignoring the importance of the public domain. They're ignoring the idea of language exhaustion. They're ignoring so many things. But as a gut matter, this is how they felt. And what I found shocking was that if I ran an analysis, every product is its own case, so 17 cases in this correlation. This chart correlated with willingness to pay. If you thought there should be a right, that was the kind of product for which people were willing to pay more if it was sponsored. And that's this row of the correlation table, the ones that are 0.63 and 0.61. Of course, willingness to pay and purchase interest correlate very strongly. It'd be kind of crazy if they didn't. Responsibility for quality correlates with nothing. Relation back correlates with nothing. But those two correlate with ethnic beliefs. So my 3 takeaways are: 1, sponsorship is rarely material to more than half of consumers. Make of that what you will. The kind of materiality measure you use matters. These are not 4 ways of asking the same question. I think there are 3 ways of asking different questions. And for unsponsored products, willingness to pay and purchase interest are strongly affected by equity groups. That's where I was coming down at the end of this. So thank you, and I'm really interested in your questions.
Can you tell us a little bit about your sample? Like, where did they come from? How many people?
Sorry, describing my sample could take 20 minutes, so I skipped over that
brief
one.
Sentence or two is fine.
Okay, yes. So I used Toluna, which is one of the big survey firms, and I had them recruit a census representative sample. I then screened for purchase interest in each of the categories of products, and you only saw the products that were within your shopping range, more or less. For the sports teams, I tailored it so that you saw the jersey of your favorite team. And I asked, are you a baseball fan? If you're a baseball fan, what team are you most likely to buy products for? So I tried to mirror the structure of a real trademark survey to the extent I could. The one way in which I differed is that, well, 2 ways in which I differed. One, you saw multiple products, just my budget was not that big. And 2, I did not use a strong control condition because for each of these, there wasn't one infringing product with one clear claim. It was, you see the product in its natural environment like you would on Amazon. How much do you care if you suddenly find out it's unsponsored? What assumptions do you make just see? So it wasn't comparative in that context.
How many people total? Approximately, I'm curious.
I think 1,100. Yeah, obviously for any individual product, the end varied, and in the paper, in the tables, I do report the end per product.
I mean, it seems to me the exact language of the questions, as in a real trademark case, are very important. Do you have the exact language of the questions? Okay.
Which questions?
So that last one, referring to unsponsored, right? And also, do you think that the maker did not need anyone's permission or authorization? I think you could phrase the question in any number of ways. Do you think that you should have to obtain the permission of someone? Do you think a party that trades in shirts should have to, right? Do you think that it's good for our society if parties have to obtain permission? Right. So the exact phrasing, it seems to me, matters a lot. And I know that you just did the normative question as sort of an interesting afterthought. I really appreciate the even-handed approach that you brought to the rest of the project. But I would just caution really close attention to language when it comes to talking about rights, talking about obligations, talking about whether something is unsponsored, whether it's genuine, because these are words that assume the conclusion that you're trying to reach in many cases. With that said, I found it really compelling how consistent your results were with the parity from case to case, with the Lamborghini from case to case. And I think the Chewy Vuitton undercuts a rationale that I've criticized, that's repeatedly used by courts, that the reason you parody fashion is because fashion is silly, and the sorts of people who make parodies of fashion are doing so as a political statement. Right? The fact that people are willing to pay more if Louis Vuitton sponsored the Chewy Vuitton toy shows that human beings are more complex, and that fashion is more complex than fashion.
It is interesting on that one particular product because I think one thing you could do with this is look at the discount rate and say, you're never going to prove likelihood of confusion if you're discounting by this much for certain kinds of products. And within the likelihood of confusion framework, find a justification for a parity rule, which is obviously a hot topic in its own right. And kind of, rather than see it as competition with likelihood of confusion, see them as relatively consistent. With the question wording, I tried very hard to avoid biasing things more than I had to, and spent a lot of time with the Jacob Jacoby treatise, and I talked to Sherry Diamond for a while, trying to get this as precise as I could. And of course, with particularly this question, I know has been a nightmare for scholars for a long time. I really like, do you assume? It's like, you're the consumer, you're in the store, you're looking at the thing, what do you think? But that's its own paper. I'm probably going to eventually write that paper unless one of you beats me to it. One of you please beat me to it. I'd rather not have to write that paper.
I mean, the very words permission or authorization presume a state of affairs in which permission or authorization is potentially innocent, right? So that's the concern.
Yeah, I couldn't find a better way to do it, but yes, I see the point.
Couple quick questions. One, is it possible for future work that some of the categories of items, that maybe some of the, I was understanding some of your charts, that there might be public perceptions about things that are closer to what humanity does. And so they think that there's a part of this, and so this equity issue comes in, because it was rather surprising to me that luxury cars, that people thought, oh yes, Lamborghini, obviously handcrafts, really expensive, 200 grand cars and keychains. And I was like, really? How'd you get to that? But obviously there's, well not obvious, but there seems to be the sense in some of those, and in that related thought I think is, for instance with the police and national parks, that when you talk about equity, is it perhaps something you want to probe, that people have a sense of, hey, that's, you know, the national parks, they're ours, we don't really care, they're not in the business of merchandising, et cetera. Is that partially, that might be something to probe, and you might, I know it's expensive, but if you could do something instead of NYPD or New York Fire Department, because after 9/11, that became its own industry, right? There are a lot of people who know, like, oh yeah, we love them, et cetera, and you gotta love them, and wear the hat even if you live anywhere. So it would be kind of interesting if you could control, say, well, what about, you know, the Ferguson, or LA, or Seattle, or something more random that's either been negative or no one really thinks about, yep, I want to wear that. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So one reason I went so scattershot with my products is to avoid having the problem of one product and understanding it really well. But NYPD, yes, 9/11, but yes,
Eric
death on Staten
Gardner.
Island, yeah. I ran this last spring, so all the baggage that's come along with police departments in the last 12 months or so is baked into the data. So it was, what's your first point? I'm sorry.
Well, so forgetting the negative side, I think they might go, which is there perhaps further work about people's perception about when the entity behind it might be in the business of merchandising or not?
Yeah, and there, just very quickly, one example I wanted to start this talk with was the idea of a Hershey's mug, because I had just gotten one. And I discovered is that Hershey's actually does make its own mugs, as does Porsche. And I love the line of business argument because I think it would solve so much, but I don't think it actually works when you look at corporate structures and how many industries corporations are in. But if you have any more thoughts, anyone, I would love feedback. Come on, email me. Thank you.